Dr. Dark One Horror Stories. I don't really know how to start this. I've thought about telling someone what I saw, but I never did. Something about it still feels like a nightmare, and I just can't shake the feeling that if I had done something differently, maybe things would have turned out differently. But it's too late now, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to get this out of my mind. Let me explain. This happened in a small town in Ukraine, not far from the capital. It's a place where nothing much happens, where people go about their business and keep to themselves. I've lived here all my life. The houses are old, some of them falling apart. The streets are mostly quiet, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees or the occasional car passing by. Most people here don't make a lot of noise or draw attention to themselves, and everyone knows everyone else's business, but not too much. It was a Sunday morning, like any other. I woke up early, the sun barely up, and I was heading to the local shop to grab some bread. The sky was gray and overcast, the kind of weather that makes everything feel still. As usual, there weren't many people out. The streets were empty, except for an old man walking his dog and a couple of kids playing in the snow near the park. I don't know why, but that morning something felt different. It was like the air was heavy, and I just had this uneasy feeling in my chest. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake it off. Anyway, I kept walking, heading toward the bakery when I saw him. A young teenage boy, maybe 13 or 14 years old. I didn't know him, but he looked familiar. He was standing near the corner of one of the small streets just off the main road. He was staring at the ground, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his face hidden beneath the hood. It wasn't anything strange at first, just a kid standing there. But then I noticed his eyes. They were wide, almost like he was in a state of shock, and his eyes flicked nervously from side to side, like he was expecting someone to jump out at him. It wasn't normal for a child to look so lost. I don't know how to explain it. It felt like something was wrong. I didn't think much of it at first. Kids wander sometimes, right? But then I heard it. A woman's voice shouting from down the street. "Yuri, come back here right now. Don't make me come over there." The voice was loud, angry. It echoed down the empty street, and I immediately felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The boy, Yuri, I assumed it was him, didn't move. He just stood there, looking like he was frozen in place. Then the woman's voice came again, even angrier this time. "You little brat, get back here, now!" I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the words hanging between us. The kid still didn't move, but his eyes were wide with fear, his hands clenched into fists, and I could see his shoulders trembling like he was holding back from crying. It wasn't my business, I know, but I couldn't help it. Something about it felt off. I kept walking, but I was keeping an eye on the boy and the street behind him. I figured if the woman came closer, I'd step in, maybe tell her to calm down or something. I don't know. I just didn't like the way she sounded. After a few seconds, I saw the woman appear at the end of the street. She was walking quickly, her pace almost frantic, like she was hunting for him. She was tall, dark hair, wearing a heavy jacket and boots. But the thing that caught me off guard was the look on her face. She was absolutely furious. I didn't know what was going on, but the way she was acting, it wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something darker, like she was ready to snap at any moment. The boy turned and started walking away from her, slowly at first. I thought maybe he was trying to get away from her, but I wasn't sure. His steps were hesitant, like he didn't know where to go. The woman saw him move, and she started shouting again. "Yuri, don't you dare! Come back here right now!" He didn't listen. He turned and started running down the street, fast. I don't know why, but I started running too. I wasn't trying to catch up to him, but I guess I was just worried. Something didn't feel right. The whole situation, it was like watching a bad dream unfold, and I just couldn't turn away. I don't know how long I followed them, but after a while, I could see the boy up ahead. He was fast, but she was catching up. She was calling his name again, but this time, her voice sounded different, desperate, almost pleading. "Yuri, please, stop running. I swear, if you don't stop, I will make you regret it." But the boy didn't stop. He kept running, his breath coming out in short bursts. I don't think he was trying to escape her anymore. It looked like he was running from something much worse. I'm not sure what happened next. My feet kept moving, but it felt like the whole world had gone. Silent. The cold wind stung my face and my heart was pounding in my chest. Everything felt so unreal. I watched as Yuri rounded the corner up ahead, and the woman was still chasing after him. I was about to catch up to them when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Yuri wasn't running anymore. He had stopped, crouching behind a dumpster at the edge of a small alleyway trying to hide. His chest was heaving, and his face was pale, like he was trying to hold in a scream. The woman saw where he went, and she stopped at the corner, standing there for a second like she was deciding what to do next. She was breathing heavily, her hands clenched into fists, and her face was twisted in a mix of rage and frustration. For a moment, everything was quiet. The woman didn't move. Yuri didn't move. Then, without warning, the woman stepped forward, walking slowly down the alley. I don't know why, but I felt this overwhelming urge to intervene, to stop her. But I didn't. I don't know why. I just stood there, watching. I saw her reach the dumpster where Yuri had been hiding, but he wasn't there anymore. I don't know how he got away, but when she looked around, she realized he was gone. She started screaming. I've never heard a scream like that. It was raw, full of pain. She called his name over and over, but the boy didn't respond. I watched her search for him for a while, but he was nowhere to be found. She walked up and down the alley, her voice hoarse from calling out. Her hands were shaking, and she looked completely broken. I don't know what happened next. I couldn't stay there. I don't know why, but I turned around and walked away. I just left. The whole thing was so strange, so off. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. The next morning, I heard the news. Yuri was gone, vanished. I never saw him again. And I've never forgotten what I saw that day. The police said they looked everywhere. They even checked nearby towns, but they never found him. His mother said he had run away before, but this time was different. This time, he just disappeared. They never found any trace of him. No one knows where he went. I've asked myself a million times what I could have done differently. Should I have tried to help him? Should I have called the police sooner? Or maybe just talked to him, asked if he was okay? I don't know what happened to that boy. I don't know if he made it out, or if something worse happened to him. But I do know that what I saw that day, his fear, his desperation, it wasn't normal. It wasn't just a kid running away from home. There was something much darker going on. Something I'll never understand. Yuri is still out there somewhere. I just hope, wherever he is, he's safe. But I know, deep down, he's probably not. I can't stop thinking about that day. I can't stop thinking about him, and I don't think I ever will. Story 2. When I was 16, we moved to a small town because my mom had a new job and the rent was cheaper. The house was nothing special, pretty plain and old, but it had a basement, which was weird to me since I'd never lived in a place with one before. It was dark and cold down there, and there was a smell, like moldy wood, with this sharp, bitter hint I couldn't quite place. I wasn't a fan of it, but I figured it was normal. A couple of months went by and I just never went down there. It was only supposed to be for storage anyway, and the smell was strong enough that I didn't want to hang around. My mom kept saying she'd clean it out one weekend, but she was always busy, so we just left it alone. One night, my mom asked me to grab a box of Christmas decorations she thought was down there. I hated that smell, but I knew it would only take a minute. So I held my breath, flicked on the light, and went down. The basement was worse than I remembered. Dust floated in the air, and every step echoed around the tiny, cramped space. There were old boxes everywhere, along with bits of broken furniture. I quickly spotted the box my mom wanted, but as I grabbed it, I noticed something weird. In one corner of the basement, hidden under a broken table, there was this old, half-ripped tarp on the ground. It looked out of place, like someone had tried to cover something but gave up halfway. I don't know why, but my stomach did this weird flip. I felt like I shouldn't, but my curiosity got the best of me. I moved the tarp, and immediately this sour smell hit me, like rotting meat. I gagged and almost left right there, but I looked down and saw something that made my whole body freeze. Under the tarp were fingers. They looked old and dried out, all wrinkly and shriveled up. Some of them still had bits of dried blood. They looked like they'd been cut off clean, like with a knife or something, and I could see faint lines on the skin, like whoever these fingers belonged to had worked with their hands a lot. I don't know how long I stood there just staring, but I heard my mom call from upstairs, and it snapped me out of it. I covered the fingers back up and grabbed the box, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold on to it. I didn't tell her about what I'd seen. I was scared she'd think I was making it up, or worse, that somehow it was my fault for being down there. I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't get those fingers out of my head. The weirdest part? A couple of days later, I overheard some people in town talking about a guy who'd gone missing years ago, a 36-year-old man who used to live in this house. No one had heard from him since. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that those fingers belong to him, and that whoever put them there is still out there, watching. Story 3. I moved to the city a few months back for a job. It was a tiny apartment in a big, busy building. I liked the anonymity of it, the constant city sounds, and the fact that people just went about their business, not really noticing anyone else. At first, everything was great, but then, about 3 weeks in, I noticed something odd. Every night, right around 3:05 a.m., I'd hear 3 knocks. It was always faint, like it was coming from somewhere far down the hall, or even from another floor. At first, I thought it was just city noises or maybe pipes creaking, but it was too regular to ignore. It was exactly 3 knocks, and it happened every single night without fail. I didn't think much of it at first. I just ignored it and went back to sleep. But as time went on, the knocks started getting louder. Or maybe I was just getting more paranoid. I could feel the tension in my shoulders every time my phone's clock hit 3:04 a.m. Sometimes I'd even catch myself holding my breath, just waiting for it. One night, I stayed up to see if I could figure out where it was coming from. I sat in bed, lights off, eyes glued to my phone's clock. The second it hit 3:05, I heard it again. 3 knocks, like always. But this time, they sounded closer, like they were right outside my door. My heart was racing, and I didn't dare open the door. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I was wide awake for the rest of the night, too scared to even go near the door. Then one morning, after another night of hearing the knocks, I decided to look through the building's security footage. It took some convincing, but I finally got the landlord to let me take a look. As I scanned through the footage from that night, I froze. At 3:04 a.m., I saw a man in a dark hoodie standing in the hallway outside my apartment. He walked slowly up to my door and knocked 3 times before turning and disappearing down the hall. My heart was pounding as I watched him disappear from view. He'd been doing this every night, right outside my door, at 3:05 a.m. for weeks, and I had no idea who he was or why he kept coming back. Now every night I lie there at 3:05 a.m. waiting to hear the knocks, terrified to open the door, but even more scared of what might happen if one day I don't. Story 4. When we moved into the house, it felt like a new start. The house was big, almost too big for just me, my wife, and our daughter. But it was affordable, with plenty of space and surrounded by open fields. It was a bit older though, and I knew it would take some work to fix up. My plan was to take it one project at a time. While moving boxes down into the basement, I noticed something odd right away. A door at the far end of the basement, bolted shut. It wasn't just locked. It had heavy metal bolts going across the top and bottom, like someone really wanted to keep it shut. I thought maybe it was a storage room or an old wine cellar that the previous owners didn't want anyone to access, but it didn't make sense why they'd need bolts for something like that. At first, I wasn't in a rush to open it. The basement itself was cluttered enough with old junk, and we had plenty to handle just settling in. Days went by, and I would go down to the basement occasionally, always glancing at that door. It had this strange, faint scratch on it, like someone had been dragging metal against it. It was subtle, but every time I saw it, it felt out of place. One day, I finally asked my wife if she knew anything about it, or if she had found any paperwork on the previous owners. She shrugged it off, saying we'd gotten the place as is, no major details included. But she did say something I hadn't thought of before. There was no way out from that locked room, no windows, no other doors. It was a completely closed-off space. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see what was in there, if anything. I spent a couple of hours working on the bolts, which were rusted and tough to break. Finally, I managed to get them off, my hands sore from all the tugging and prying. Inside, it was dark, cold, and musty. The walls had patches of mildew, and there was an old wooden bench with what looked like marks from a knife or a blade. On the ground, I noticed small, scattered items: an old shoe, a broken necklace, and something that looked like an ID badge from years ago. My heart started racing when I realized the badge had a picture on it. It was of a young girl, probably no older than 15 or 16, and her expression looked terrified. I backed out of the room and spent the rest of the night trying to figure out what to do. Should I call someone? Was it a crime scene? I looked up the house's history online, hoping for some explanation, but I found nothing about any missing person or any investigation here. I wanted to believe it was all just some creepy coincidence, some leftover junk from a previous owner. But later that night, as I tried to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about that ID badge, about who she was, and why someone would have bolted that room shut. It's been a few weeks since I found that room. I haven't been back down there since, but some nights, I catch myself staring at the basement door from the top of the stairs, wondering if there's something I missed, or if someone else will come looking for what's still down there.